Okay, I'd like to commence with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation, from whose lands this event is being broadcast today, and pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where we are joining us from today. Feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you would like to do that. And so I'd now like to introduce our guest for today, Jacqueline Harvey. Jacqueline Harvey is one of Australia's most celebrated children's authors, having sold over 2 million copies of her much-loved series worldwide. After a distinguished 20-year career in education, she transitioned to full-time writing in 2012 and has since created the internationally successful Alice Miranda, Clementine Rose, Kelsey and Max, and Willa and Wolf series. Her flagship Alice Miranda series, which began as a picture book concept, has been translated into multiple languages and adapted into animated films. Harvey's work has received numerous accolades, including Yabba Awards and multiple shortlisting for prestigious children's books prizes. Beyond writing, Jacqueline is a passionate literacy advocate, serving as ambassador for Room to Read and the Dimmicks Books children's charities, and recently was patron of the Somerset Story Fest. She regularly presents at schools, libraries, and festivals globally, inspiring young readers and writers. She divides her time between Sydney, Australia, and Queenstown, New Zealand, and continues to champion literacy outcomes for children worldwide. Lastly, Jacqueline is also the Director of Writing New South Wales 2025 Kids and YA Writers Festival, which is going to be held in Callan Park on the 9th of August. This festival brings together a wide variety of writers across a range of genres to discuss other things, amongst other things, the current state of the writing sector for young people in Australia. Jacqueline, after all that, welcome to First Friday.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. We always like to start off with just a few questions, which are so, how did you get to where you are? Can you remember the first story you wrote that made you think, this is something I can do?
Um, I think probably the fact that I actually finished a 20,000 word junior fiction story. Started it and finished it when I had glandular fever and was very, very ill and had to take about 6 weeks off work. And during that time, though, I got well enough to be able to sort of think and sit and write. And I finished a novel. And although I don't think it was a very good novel, it was that sense that I actually, could do something that was quite lengthy or lengthier than, the short stories that I've been writing for my classes. And I suppose for me, I won a competition with the Children's Book Council of New South Wales for an unpublished manuscript. At the time, way back then, 2001, it was called the Frustrated Writers Mentoring Competition, which I think is a perfect name for, a writing competition for, frustrated children's book authors. And when I won that competition, it sort of got my pinky in the door with a few publishers, and I thought, oh, maybe I could do this. But it was a very long process. It took me 10 years to be an overnight success, I can tell you. So
In that 10 years when we had a discussion earlier, what was it that kept you going? Because you had that initial, I would imagine the initial sort of flush of enthusiasm at getting that first award, and
yeah.
then it was another 10 years before you could say, okay, this is now my career.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was fortunate. I had 4 books published in quite quick succession in 2003, 4, and 5. And one of those was the picture book, The Sound of the Sea, which was the manuscript that had won me that competition. And so, I wrote that picture book. It became an honour book in the Children's Book of the Year Awards. I thought, oh, I'm on my way. This is fantastic. And then nothing. I was writing. I thought, I'm going to be a picture book author. No, I wasn't. And I suppose what sustained me was I just had this really big belief in myself that this is what I should be doing. And so for me, it was, I guess taking that walk I call it the walk in the writing wilderness, that galvanized me even more into thinking, well, how am I going to approach this? And what I ended up doing was I really just thought, well, I'm going to write the book that I would have wanted to read when I was 10 years old. And I wrote Alice Miranda. And that book's, that story, that book changed my life completely, because it enabled me, ultimately 3 years after it was published, though, to become a full-time writer. So I think it was just, I had this really big self-belief, and I also, and call it vanity, call it what you like, but I was determined to be published by a traditional publisher. I wanted somebody else to be able to say, yep, she's good enough to do this. And that was what, kept me going.
Okay. Did you ever skirt with the idea of independent publishing?
No,
No?
no, I just didn't. Because I was working full time as well, and I was the deputy head of a big school, and then I was the director of development of the same school. I didn't have time to look into that properly anyway. And I know, many people have had very great success with that. So, there's no taking away from that. But for me, it was, I wanted somebody else to tell me that this was good enough, and we're going to put money behind it, and we're going to help you. And so that's what I was determined to do.
Yeah. So other than perseverance, what's been the biggest lesson that this 20 plus years in the writing publishing industry has taught you?
Okay, it's a marathon, not a sprint. and you need to manage your expectations really, really big time. And even like right through, you need to manage your expectations, because there are times when you write a book and you think, oh, this is going to sell, gangbusters. And the last few years in kids' books have been really tough. I think there's been a bit of a lull in the industry. I think post-pandemic, a lot of parents have possibly, apart from the fact that we've had tough economic times, I think a lot of parents have said, right, you can read those, 20 books that I bought you during the pandemic that you haven't read. And, the first part of the pandemic was exceptionally good for sales for people like me who had an established career. But then, we've ridden a tough wave at the moment, a downward wave. And I guess it's, you've just got to keep your optimism, be optimistic, and write what you love. I think for me, I'm one who really believes in, you have to write the story that you love. And you have to fall in love with your characters, and that in turn conveys, when a reader reads my story, I want them to, to be able to see how much I really adore these characters, and I adore this story.
Yeah. Look, being true to your creative self, of course, is vitally important to so many writers. But at the same time, the publishing industry, like every type of industry, especially creative industries, go through peaks and troughs, and you've spoken about that somewhat. But what are some of the publishing trends that you see in children's and young adult literature that are happening at the moment?
I think graphic novels are really on the rise. That's an area that's very, becoming very popular, and I think that's also got to do with attention spans being shorter, and a lot of kids aren't reading as dense a text as they perhaps would have 20 years ago. I think audiobooks is another area that's really on the rise. I know for me, it was quite sort of, small part of my, my royalties for a while. And now audiobooks is, it's probably 10-15% of what I'm making. I think though it's interesting because, as a former teacher as well, I see that, everything old is new again. We're going back to much more didactic practice of teaching reading and teaching writing. And I suspect that will have an impact because kids will begin to read a bit more, a bit lengthier texts again. So I'm not sure, but those are probably some of the things I've seen.
Okay. It's interesting in graphic novels. It's something that I've sort of been a consumer of for most of my life, as well as other types of writing. Is graphic novels something that you think need to be conceived as a graphic novel, or can they be converted from other stories?
Oh, they can definitely be converted. I mean, you look at the success of the Babysitters Club. That's enormous now, and the Babysitters Club was huge in I dare say I think it was the 70s and 80s, and now they've converted those into graphic novels. And you look at a series, the fantasy series Wings of Fire. There's a Wings of Fire traditional series, and then there is the Wings of Fire graphic novel series. So I guess, though, the thing is with a graphic novel, there's a huge amount of work for the illustrator in those books. So I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't mind toying with the idea of, having seeing if anything of mine could be put into that into that genre. But I just don't know. Obviously, because I cannot draw to save my life, it would require a huge commitment from the illustrator.
Yes, and with that huge commitment, you would need to have some sort of almost a guarantee that the book is going to be published because that's a
Yes.
lot of work
Yeah,
for.
no, I don't think it's something I'd even embark on unless it was commissioned. So,
Yes, yeah. Look, you mentioned their attention spans and ability to read longer texts and a hope that maybe things are going to get better. How has the publishing industry, as you've seen it both as a teacher and as a writer, how has it evolved since you first joined, and where do you think it's going to go in the next few years?
so in terms of, sorry, can you say
Yeah.
that again? I
So,
was sort of, I
yes,
got
no, that's all
distracted. I
right.
was I was
So,
distracted by a question that's come up in the
yeah,
chat. That's all.
could you
Um,
could you explore? We'll do it in two parts. I did the terrible thing of asking too many questions in the
yep.
same question, pretending it was one question. Can you explore a little bit your statement about attention spans having been reduced through either
Yep.
screen time or other factors, and somewhat what the impact of the education system has on the ability and the desire of kids to read in the past?
Yeah. Okay. So, something that I've noticed is, when I first started teaching, a long time ago now, in the early 90s, kids were reading books that were quite dense in terms of the text and quite sophisticated in terms of language, but they were short novels. So you think back to the Paul Jennings, even Morris Gleitzman, oh gosh, what was her name? She wrote Robin Klein. She wrote, her books were not huge books, but they were very, yeah, as I said, denser in text, and conceptually quite, sophisticated. And it's interesting what we've evolved to is kids that want books that are really fat but full of illustrations, be they either a graphic novel, which is more laid out like a comic, if you like, or just a book that is a traditional kind of story, but loads and loads of pictures in it. So actually a much, much shorter amount of words and probably less sophisticated language. So we've seen that evolve, a lot. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with the idea that we need to cater for boys that don't read. And that, there's a big push for to capture that boy market. And now the market is totally saturated with books like that. And I see, though, it's interesting. I've just published a new book called The Girl and the Ghost, which is 52,000 words. It has a few illustrations in it, which is, again, that's something we've never done in a novel of that length of mine before. And but it's proving to be really popular. It's flying off the shelves. It's there are kids who want that denser level of text again. But interestingly, I heard recently that at the Bologna Children's Book Fair, a lot of the European publishers were buying what we would call younger readers, so novels that are or books that are sort of in the 10 to 20,000 word market, and marketing them as middle grade because that's what the kids are reading. And so I guess my concern is, though, then they're still getting to high school and they're being expected to read The Lord of the Flies because we haven't evolved there in terms of, we're still giving kids in high school books that we were reading, 20, 30 years ago, and they're failing and they're not loving reading because that's what they've got. So I guess it's the balance of finding how do we encourage kids in primary school in year 5 and 6 particularly to be reading longer, more sophisticated texts. I think along the lines of things like Tristan Banks or Katrina Nanestad or Judith Russell, and make sure that by the time they get to high school, that they can take on that tougher stuff, but also encouraging high school teachers to revisit some of the books that they're using, and not be using stuff that's 40 years old that kids are not enjoying.
Yeah. Did you at any point in your career have to simplify your language where you ask? Was that a discussion you ever had with one of your editors or publishers?
Occasionally they'll ask me to, to take a word out and I really rail against that because I think, the reason that I have a good vocabulary is because as a child I read books that had words that I didn't know and I went and looked them up or I asked my mum. And so I think, it's good to learn. It's good to encourage curiosity and encourage kids to want to expand their vocabularies. And, it was really encouraging. Yesterday I was in a school I was doing the Bellingen Readers and Writers Festival for the last three days up around Bellingen Coffs Harbour. And, I had a kid ask a question about how did you get to have such a big vocabulary? And I got to talk about thesauruses and dictionaries and, and when you don't know a word in a story, ask, go and look it up or ask an adult who can help you to look it up. And I think that's, let's not dumb it down. Let's encourage kids to be smart and to want to read harder and wider.
Harder and wider indeed. What do you think has been the greatest impediment? Is it attention span or vocab, or are they in
I think attention span is really a tricky one. In fact, I was saying to you earlier about Andrew, about the study that's just come out from the OECD about screen use.
Yeah,
and
so
it's a very, very recent.
Numbers were frightening.
Oh, terrifying. So I can give you some of these, some of these numbers. That 12% of Australian 15-year-olds are spending over 80 hours a week on a screen for pleasure and school. And, 20% of teens spend at least 40 hours a week online for leisure. So they're not reading books. They're, they're engaged in either the gaming or their social media. And I think the sobering thing is that really more than 2 hours a day online is linked to depression, anxiety, body image problems, poor sleep patterns. All of those things are really really important. And the other interesting part of this, though, is I've seen schools, and I'm hearing more of schools now that are actually taking screens out of the equation, especially for their younger students, and encouraging them to handwrite and to. I had a kid yesterday say to me, "How come your handwriting is so nice?" And I said, "Because we used to practice it all the time at school." But also handwriting, when you write something by hand, it develops a different part of your brain. And I think that's something we need to recognize. And, I'm not saying everything old is new again and, that we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But I think we do need to recognize, what's good for kids and what's not good for kids.
Yeah, baby in the bathwater. I was just thinking, I've got still a couple of teenage kids living with me, and when they're in a bad mood and they're far enough away from me, they often call me Boomer. Um, there must be
Don't they all?
there must be something positive that we can take from the screen generation. Do you think is there something that the online nature of young people today is actually beneficial and something that can be celebrated or
Oh,
used
look, I think
for the
that they
writing
have
industry?
there's a lot of fun stuff that you can do. And I mean, yesterday I was with another author, Felice Arena, and he loves a TikTok reel and a TikTok video. And, like we were playing around with some stuff yesterday and it was very, very funny and we were having a good laugh. And, and then we got heaps and heaps of views of this thing that we made. So, that's positive in terms of our exposure and careers and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of positives to it, but, there's a lot to be said too for switching off and having some, getting into a state of flow. And I think that's not what we're allowing ourselves to do as much anymore. That sense of when you read a book and you just get lost in the pages of that book and your mind goes to a different place. Or when I write a story and I turn off all the social media and I just concentrate solely on that story. And you get into that, who's the researcher, Csikszentmihalyi, and he talks about the state of flow. And I think that's such an important thing to be able to do.
I'm glad you're able to pronounce his name. It's something I've never.
I worked with a colleague who was very big on Csikszentmihalyi, so we learned that a lot.
You can say that again. So with the online nature of kids, obviously they're connected not just to the people in their classroom, the people in their school, the people in their, sporting and cultural clubs. They're connected to people all over the world. Right. Does this bring up new types of genres that writers could explore or new themes? Do you think that that there's going to be a change in the things that young people are interested in reading?
I think they're more aware of the world around them. That's for sure. They're probably more aware in different ways of things that are going on in the world, and I mean possibly more political too, and more aware of things like climate change and that part of those parts of life. But I think ultimately kids just love good stories and they love adventures and escapism. And you know, for me, growing up as a kid in the southwest of Sydney in Camden, we didn't travel anywhere. We just stayed at home. We went to the beach for our holidays and we went to my grandma's at Fairfield, for visits, etc. But for me, reading was the thing that took me to different places. And I don't think that's any different for kids now that, you get a story, you get to go to the Swiss Alps, or you get to go to France, or you get to go, have an action-packed spy adventure in Singapore. But I think maybe what's different too, though, that the kids now, whereas we kind of imagined all that in our heads, now the kids can go online and actually see those places that I've set the story, and they can, I say to kids all the time, Google Maps are my friend as an author, because you can actually go, put up an area that you're reading about and you can go, oh, well, I'm going to take a walk down that street and I'm going to see for myself. So I think there's that, all that sort of stuff's really positive and allows kids to be connected in different ways.
Which is easier? I think it was Joyce who used to write letters to his friends back in Dublin saying, exactly how many steps is it from this address to that address, as he was, doing the exact nature of his writing. So
Yeah,
yeah.
now you just bring up the Google Maps and take yourself for a walk. So
Oh, yeah. Speaking of Google Maps and the ability of it to take some of the legwork out. Um, Young kids today, obviously AI is huge in the way that they
mhm.
approach learning. It's huge in the way that they approach understanding the world and expressing themselves. What role do you think AI has in the publishing sector for young people?
I'm really well. I don't love AI for in terms of my industry because obviously, you know, I've seen some pretty bad stuff where, so I've seen, kids using AI to write stories. Well, you're not writing a story, you're stealing somebody else's work. It's not clever. And I've actually said this to two big audiences recently, that when you use AI to write, you are stealing from every published author in the world, because all of the meta it's all being trained by published authors' work that has been stolen. And if you go onto the Atlantic website and you put your name into, there's this search tool and it will tell you how many of your books have been actually stolen and used by AI. So I think in terms of creativity, I really fear the impact that it could have, because it's not creative and it's not clever. And where are all the original ideas? Where is anything that's original? And I think too, AI lies. I had an example of some kids who wrote a bio for me for a festival, and this girl stood up and she read the bio and she said, Jacqueline Harvey was born in New Zealand and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just looking at her going, nope, nope, nope. And she said to me, I said afterwards, where did you get the bio from? She said, your website. I said, no, you didn't. Anyway, when, she was the fellow running the festival had a word to her, and she confessed that she'd used Chat GPT to write it, but it was all wrong. And so, it's not reliable enough either. And even in terms of, lots of our audience probably saw it the other day, all those book reviews that were generated by AI. It was one of the newspapers, I think in, I don't know if it was Chicago or somewhere, and half the books didn't actually exist. So, how unreliable is it?
Yes. Do you think it has any validity as a tool for writers in any place?
Look, I will not, I'm not going to use it. I don't use it. I don't use it to generate ideas. I don't use it to tell me where things are or to do research, because if I can't do that myself, then there's a problem. I think it's going to make people feel clever. but really it's just lazy, and I just don't love it. So in terms of creative writing, no. I mean, in terms of, yes, it has its uses for other things. Like, my sister was telling me she uses it to organize meeting minutes from meetings that she has for work. Well, that's fine. That's just factual. That's something that's, if it's going to help you to be faster, that's fine. But in terms of even generating, I guess I had a dad recently who said to me, "Oh, I use it to generate story ideas, story prompts for my son." And I think, well, if that's as far as you take it, then maybe it's okay. But I would, I really worry when I hear that teachers are using it to mark narrative work as well. And I think, yeah, not for me.
Right. Have you come across AI in the publishing industry yourself?
No, not with the publisher, not with my publisher. I haven't heard them talking about using it or anything.
Excellent. Okay. Well, let's move on to the festival because you are the director of the Writing New South Wales 2025 Kids and YA Writers Festival. When you were approached, what inspiration did you have about creating a festival focused specifically on children and YA writers? What were you trying to achieve?
Okay, so obviously I was very flattered to be approached. I've actually been a participant in this festival a number of times. I wanted to, I guess I thought back to what it was like when I was starting out, 20 odd years ago, and that I didn't know anything. I didn't know anyone. I had no clue how to get my foot in the door. And I think the only reference that I used at the time, there was this great big fat yellow paperback book called The Writer's Marketplace. And, you bought that and, trawled through that to see, was anybody taking unsolicited manuscripts? But obviously, this book is published. So half the time the information's out of date by the time you go to use it. So for me, I really wanted to create a festival program for people who were, either in the situation where I was 20 odd years ago, just starting out, not really knowing anything, and being able to come along and hear from people who have either just started out and have been, just been published, or people who've been here for a long time. And how do you maintain a long career in an industry that can be fickle and hard to make a living in? So I really wanted to, I suppose I thought about my younger self and thought, well, how could I have helped? How could I have been helped by something like this when I was starting out?
Yes. So what does you see you've got this inspiration, you know what you want to do, you're trying to, in a sense, recreate some of the aspects of that very large yellow book. What were some of the challenges that you faced in putting together the list of panelists and speakers that you have?
Well, I had such an incredible response. So many people wanted to be part of it, and so obviously it's sort of um, making the decisions about who's going to add the most value to the various panels, but also looking at how do you put together panels which are going to be synergetic, where perhaps the people they know each other, or they've worked together before, so there's a natural sort of bouncing off each other. I mean, what you want it to be is you want it to be entertaining. You want there to be some funny moments, and you want people to be able to walk away, with a couple of big takeaways. This is how I might get my foot in the door. This is how, this is what I should be doing to try and improve my writing. So there's, it was really just trying to choose, like being overwhelmed by an incredible amount of talent and trying to make that work in the sense of, and there are people who sadly I couldn't take, because the tyranny of distance is a tricky one as well. But also there were people who, while they have wonderful skills, just didn't fit with this particular program. So it was just, overwhelmed by a plethora of riches, I would say, that I had to deal with.
In this plethora, how did you balance the needs of emerging and slightly more established writers?
Yeah, so there's a couple of panels about getting your foot in the door and keeping it there, and another one about well, there's panels. There's that panel. There's one for how do you create a career and maintain longevity. But then I've looked also at things like series fiction, because series fiction is always it's always a winner for publishers and for authors and for readers. So looking at people who have written successful series, how do I put them together? I've got a really great panel about creating communities of writers and illustrators with Alison Tate and Danny V, and they have both created incredible communities. With Alison Tate and Al Rushby and Megan Daly have Your Kids Next Read, which is a massive community and something that if people don't know about it, they need to have a look. Danny V has had a podcast for a long time, Words and Nerds, and between the two of them, they have so much. So they have a wealth of knowledge about where to go and how do you become part of that community of writers and illustrators and readers as well. So yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate to have Sally Rippon, who is the current Australian Children's Laureate, and she'll be talking about trends and things that she's seeing at the moment, and she's traveling around Australia as part in her role, and so I'm very pleased to be going to have a conversation with her about that. There's one of the things I really wanted to do is to have a mock acquisitions meeting. So the acquisitions meetings at publishers are a bit secret squirrel, actually a lot secret squirrel. I mean, people, and when I first started out, I thought it was just one person who made the decision. Well, that's your book's going to get published. I'm the publisher. I get to decide. Not true. There's a huge team. There's marketing, there's publicity, there's the sales team. Everybody sits in on that meeting, and everyone weighs in on what. And sometimes there are wonderful books that don't get published because they can't see a marketing strategy for it, or they can't see an audience for it. And so for me, to have the knowledge of the Penguin Random House team, who are going to actually do a mock acquisitions meeting, I'm really excited for that panel. I've told them to be kind, but to be realistic and to be honest. And I think that's a big part of it too. It's the making sure that people come away from the festival feeling as though they have a better understanding of the industry, but also that they have realistic understanding of the industry. And that, I said earlier about managing your expectations. I remember when I started out, I thought, I'll get my first book contract and then I'll be able to quit my job. I mean, how naive is that? And so, you want people to have that really honest understanding, because there are very, very few people who do that, mega 6-figure, 8-figure, 6-figure, 7-figure deal for their first book. For most people, it is a long slog. It's not, that, amazing deal straight up.
Yeah. Look, you've mentioned a lot of things there, and I want to really come back to the end of the festival. But before we do that, some of the panels are discussing things that you've already discussed, such as the graphic novel and web series. But there's also a panel in there that really surprised me, which was the rise of nonfiction for young
Yes.
readers. Can you talk a little bit more about that particular genre? Because I know here at Writing New South Wales, nonfiction, memoir, or biography is a really important genre for many of our community. And I wasn't aware that that was now being translated or transferred into the young adult market. Can you talk
Yeah, it's
more about
really, I mean, on the program it says nonfiction, but it's narrative nonfiction when you dig deeper into it. And so I wanted to have, 3 authors who've actually written very successfully in that genre. So, Louise Park did a narrative nonfiction book about her grandfather and his role at Gallipoli. Which has been, and that's being used in schools. That's been, hugely popular. Megan Daly has written a book on bees, but written it as a narrative nonfiction. So it's a way that's rising in popularity, being able to teach kids about subjects, about nonfiction subjects, but teaching it through the lens of a story. And so while, you might have a book that has, so Megan's book has a story about a girl and, a beekeeper, but then there's all these little breakout boxes about facts about the beekeepers and facts about the bees and all that sort of thing. And I think it's a way to get kids really interested in a subject without it being too just too heavy in the text, and make it more, in a sense, you've got a story, but then you've got all those wonderful facts that go around the story. And so that for kids, I thought that was really worth exploring. And we've got and Suzanne Gervais in there as well. She's written stories about her own parents' experience in the war. And so it's just an area that I think is becoming more popular, and kids are really, it's resonating with kids.
Is there a tension, especially like if you're looking at the stories you mentioned, one about the war and Gallipoli, is there a tension between the narrative and what might be sort of like the historical fact of the situation?
In terms of how do
Um,
you...
so if you look at Gallipoli, was it a success? Was it not a success? Where does the narrative imperative to have climaxes and then those sorts of things running through the text, how does that sort of marry into what might be the sort of the bare historical?
Yeah, I mean, Louise used I think it was her great grandfather's diaries, and so there is a lot of it is factual anyway through the narrative. I guess people want to be true to the facts and true to how things actually played out, and in that way it's a bit different to historical fiction in that with the historical fiction you often inject a lot of facts, but then you're obviously building a story around those facts, and you're using your imagination to tease out the story. But yeah, I think in the narrative nonfiction, I'll be interested to see how well received that panel is, and that people are how interested people will be to see the machinations of that side of the genre.
Yeah. And I did say I wanted to come back to the end of the festival.
Yep.
When people leave, what would you like them to do next?
Oh, what would I like them to do next?
Yeah.
I'll probably look at if they're really genuinely, if the festival has resonated and they're genuinely interested in pursuing publishing with children's and YA, then looking to how are they going to best serve themselves in terms of their skills and their how are they going to make connections and be able to continue those connections. So, are they going to meet people and form a writers group, or are they going to do a course with Writing New South Wales, or are they going to join Your Kids Next Read or Sunshine Street Facebook page, which is all for aspiring authors. So there's so many different ways you can keep connected. So I would hope that people will make connections at the festival and will meet people and, write things down, take away from that, and use the knowledge that they've got that day to try and support their own ambitions and their own careers.
Yeah. I think one of the benefits of having a festival that is designed specifically for writers is that everyone at the festival is, in a sense, heading in the same direction.
Yes.
They've all got shared similar goals.
Yeah.
And so I think it is important, if you're going to have these connections coming out, that you're actually seeking these connections when you come to the festival. It is not a place, it's not a series of movies, is it? Where you sit and watch and then move to the next one.
No, and it is definitely about creating connections. And I've seen it happen before at this particular festival where people have met publishers and they've been able to even just have a brief discussion with a publisher, and maybe there's something that stays with the publisher, or the publisher says, look, I'd like to see more of what you've done, or that opportunity in itself is just huge, because to have access to people who are professionals in the industry. As I said, I didn't know any of that stuff when I started out, and I would have loved to have been able to come to something like this and learn from the experts and see how they do it. And I guess my advice though to people would be present, but don't be pushy. So
I was going to say, one of the questions that I did have down here was that when you were putting together, as people begin to know that, you're directing the festival and, this might be the first of many, 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 or the second of many, many that you're going to direct. Is it something that writers want to appear on? Is it something that they see as very, like, do you get hit up at parties by people saying, "Oh, can you put me on the next panel?" Do you get mysterious flowers sent to you?
no, no. I mean, look, I guess I know a lot of writers, and I spend a lot of time. Recently I've been at various festivals, and I guess people are very happy to be part of it. And I have had a few people say to me, "Oh, next time I'd really love to be part of that." So yeah, I mean, people are very enthusiastic, which is wonderful. But no, they're not. They're not bribing me with flowers or extra money or anything.
Yes, yes. Well, look, there's a flood of questions.
There is a lot of. I've been watching some of these
There's a lot
questions
coming
coming
in.
in.
So, Violet, one of the great people who works here she's been putting them into some sort of order for us. I
Oh,
think there's a lot of them are looking at the publication process and the pitching process.
yep.
First of all, I know that you're very anti-AI or you're very leery of AI.
Well, I'm just wary of AI, I
Very,
guess.
yes.
Wary.
Would you use AI to help you deliver a pitch for your work?
I wouldn't, but I'm not saying that it's something other people shouldn't do. If that's what makes them feel comfortable, then you could. But you've also got to be able to back it up and have your own thought processes as well.
Yeah.
So, if AI helps you to write something, just make sure that your own writing is equally is better. So
Than that. Another question that's come through, and we did have one very early on from Emmy, and others have joined in. How different is it pitching, hopefully a pitch that you've written yourself, a book that is a picture book, or even more complex, a pop-up pull-out book, a book with moving parts? How much more difficult is it to do that pitch?
Or for a picture book or a very young, we're talking like a young sort of tactile kind of a book.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, oh yeah, I mean, I think that is quite tricky because, well, for a picture book, you can probably do your picture book in a very, in a nutshell. But if you want a book that has lots of moving parts and that sort of thing, then I guess you're going to have to explain it. Maybe even I don't know, if you're clever enough to make a little, model of it, maybe that's what you should do. But yeah, I don't know because I don't write those kind of. Well, I write picture books, and I could, if I was pitching, Kevin the sheep. You'd say it's about a sheep who knows his own mind. Kevin's not a sheep. He knows his own mind, and he embarks on a mission to make himself the best version of, or to be the best version of himself. And so you can sort of do that in a nutshell. But I think the added pop up bits and what have you, that's a bit harder to share in a pitch.
Yes, no, I can understand. And we've had a few questions in previous First Fridays about pop-up books and those sort of, as you said, the more tactile ones. And it is, if you don't have the skills to make it or present it, it's going to be a hard curve for you.
Yeah, harder to explain it. Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Okay. Getting away from the AI, because I don't want your blood to boil live on
Okay.
screen. Um, The audience, of course, we haven't discussed the audience. We have discussed the audience quite a bit. But with picture books you've got, or with books for young people, you've actually got almost like a double jointed audience. You've got the person who's going to read it, which is the young person, and then you've
Mm-hmm.
got the person who is going to buy it, which is obviously or most commonly going to be an adult, probably a parent or a guardian.
Depends on the age of the book though, because kids have
True.
a lot more purchasing power now than they ever did before.
Yes, yes. We've got a question from Kate who says, how do you strike a balance between true to yourself, writing for entertainment value, and some sort of gatekeeping or filtering that might go on through the industry? She includes a thing about violence in books for middle grade and compares it to books such as Roald Dahl, which, packed with stuff that which will you may not be encouraged to include in your books today.
Yeah,
How
you probably
navigate?
won't get away with
Yeah.
today some of the stuff that he did. But then, so how do you look? I mean, my Kenzie and Max series was a spy series, so there was obviously violence in that, but measured violence. I wasn't murdering people every minute. But the kids were doing things like flying helicopters or racing cars and stuff like that, which most 11-year-olds aren't going to be doing in real life. I think you've got to also think how much how if it's not real, then it's not real. It's a story. I think you do have to be mindful of things like how much if you're going to write romance for middle grade, then it's got to be pretty innocent romance. Like in my new book, The Girl and the Ghost, there's a very innocent burgeoning romance between the 13 and 14-year-old characters, but it's things like a look, a touch, holding hands. There's nothing in it that's overtly sexual or overtly that wouldn't actually that would make you kind of go, oh, good grief. So I think you've got to know the age of who your readership is likely to be. And when we were talking about The Girl and the Ghost to begin with, we were kind of saying, 10 to 14-year-olds. I've been having 7-year-olds buy it, and so I'm thinking, well, thank goodness that romance is very innocent. So it needs to be. I guess you do have to be true to yourself, but you also do have to be aware of the age of the audience and what might not be considered appropriate. Extreme violence. It's interesting though, because a lot of those romantasy books though for teens are quite violent and quite overtly sexual. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not a publisher, so I don't know exactly how how they decide what to do and what not to do. But I'm always aware of not making it too much, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned your mystery series, and Leanne has a question. Can you recommend any courses? She loves the mystery elements in your stories and
Right.
she wants to develop that within her own writing career. Could you recommend any courses or ways to learn more about how to write
How to
mystery?
write mysteries. Read a lot of mysteries, I would say. Read a lot and analyze them and just think about, well, what makes a great mystery. I've been doing courses with kids on writing mysteries, but I haven't actually thought to do one for adults on writing mysteries, but maybe I should. So I don't know. I don't know of anyone who's doing. I mean, maybe in Writing New South Wales there is something coming up for writing mysteries with kids. I'm not sure. I know. It's one of those things though. Like nobody taught me how to write a mystery. I just read a lot of mysteries, and then I thought about, well, what makes a great mystery, and then analyzed it. And I do say that writing a mystery is like cutting off a whole lot of threads and tying the threads at the top and then basically just getting them and going and making a big mess. And then when you write a mystery, each thread at the end has to just shake out. You've got to be able to shake it out, and so that it all falls out nicely at the end, but not too much like tied up with a bow. But yeah, that's, I guess, the secret to writing a good mystery is to have enough red herrings and enough, throw the reader off the scent a bit and make sure that it's the end of a chapter, that it's ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, so you want to keep going, that sort of thing. But in terms of actual courses, I'm not sure. Sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all right. For those who do want to keep up, just make sure that you're subscribed to Newsbite. The Writing New South Wales comes out every week. And when we do have courses that are on the mystery genre, you will be the first to know. Anna B wants to know, because we mentioned that, or you mentioned that the very first book you wrote was conceived as a picture book. Your
Mm-hmm.
kids moved away from that. And Anna B wants to know, why did you make that move?
So when I first thought of Alice Miranda, I was going to write a picture book, but then it just became very clear straight away that she had a lot more to say. And so that was not going to work as a picture book. And I think, 21 books later, she definitely doesn't work as a picture. Well, she might work as a picture book. I could write a younger version. I've actually moved back into picture books too, though, because I've had 4 picture books published in the last 3 years, and have another one coming out in July. And so it's interesting though for me. I think my I love writing picture books. They're fun. I particularly love rhyme. And, when you do rhyme, you've got to do it really well. And you mentioned Roald Dahl earlier, and there's a lot of stuff he wouldn't get away with anymore. He probably wouldn't get away with some of the revolting rhymes and dirty beasts anymore, but they were stories that I read over and over again to my classes, and I just thought he was the master of the meter and the rhythm and the rhyme, and I learned a lot from reading those books. I guess I've moved back into, squarely into the middle grade area at the moment with The Girl and the Ghost, because I think I love being able to take a character and give them that development and to have a longer storyline. And even though it's a huge amount of work, it's very satisfying to me.
Both Anna and Leanne in the audience have questions about The Girl and the Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
How many books do you have lined up for The Girl and the Ghost?
So I signed on for 3, and
yes. How many are in the Jacqueline Harvey mind?
Oh, well, I signed up for 3, and this week my publisher offered me contracts for number 4 and 5. So we know that it's going to be at least 5. I think, I'm not sure. I mean, in my head, I can do. It's one of those series that I just love these characters so much. It probably in my head could go for more than 5, but we'll just see how it goes. And I'm so grateful that we've gone beyond 3 already, because when that series finishes, it really will finish. I know exactly how it's going to end. I've got I've got that ending already, very firmly in my head, and there's no coming back from it. So when we end it, we end it. And so if I'm not prepared, if I'm not ready to end it, I'll fight for more.
Okay. One of the other questions that was connected to the Ghost series was the target age when you started writing? And I'm just going to add to that. Will it be the same target age when you finish writing, or will you bring those readers with you and get maybe more complex, more detailed?
I guess, like I said before, the target age was kind of 10 to 14, so that middle grade market. But again, it seems to be having, a broader audience already. So I'm not sure. I think in terms of will I take the readers with me? Yes, the characters will get older. So, we've started off, and Josephine's 12, about to turn 13. The boy that she fancies, Gabriel, he's 14. The ghost, well, he won't age anymore because he's 14 forever. But yeah, I mean, I can see them getting a little bit older. I can't see them getting to, 18. I don't think that that's where I'd take it.
Right. The next question. So and then what we might do, we've only got about 5 minutes left. There's a lot of people who always, when we have authors come in, they want to know about the process.
Mm-hmm.
What is your writing process? Do you have a schedule, set time of day, a specific desk and window that you need to look out?
Yeah.
How is it that you set about writing?
Okay, so basically I divide my life, as you mentioned earlier, between Sydney and Queenstown, New Zealand. So our home, I guess our house is in Queenstown, our apartment is in Sydney. I write in Queenstown now. I love to write at home in Queenstown. I have a beautiful view out the window of the mountains and the lake, and it's very inspiring. So when I'm at home in Queenstown, I will allocate, I'm going home on Sunday for 6 weeks, and I will be working on the second Girl and the Ghost book, and I will probably be starting to write the third Girl and Ghost book while I'm there. In terms of my process each day, I have become addicted to pickleball in the last year. So I'm a massive pickleball fan. And I used to do F45 gym, and I found apart from the fact that my gym closed down in Queenstown, and I thought, no, I've got to find something else to do, and possibly something that's not going to give me as many injuries. So I started playing pickleball, and I go every morning from about 9 till 11, and then I come home and I work from, say, 11:30 until about 6 o'clock. And the way I work on a book is that I divide up how many weeks I've got to write the book, or how long have I got to write the book, and I work out how many words I have to write each day to meet that target. And so I'm quite disciplined about, this is what I need to do to meet that deadline. And when I'm in Sydney, if I can, most of the time when I'm in Australia or in Sydney, I'm usually on some sort of publicity tour. I'm visiting schools. I've just been here since the 27th of April, and I've done a tour of Melbourne, a tour of Brisbane. I've done the Sydney Writers Festival. I've done Bellingen Writers Festival, and I've nursed my husband through a knee replacement. So it's been
Busy,
a busy time
busy,
here.
busy, busy.
Yeah, so I try to sort of, when I'm writing, I'm very disciplined about my writing.
When you're writing and you're very disciplined and you're clearly energetic and passionate about what you do, when you don't hit that target, how do you treat yourself? Are you kind or do you go, I have not been good enough today?
No, no, I'll just lower the word target in my calendar and go, oh, you did it, and then I'll make it twice as much for the next day. So then I think, oh, that was a bit slack today, but then I just adjust things. I'm not too hard on myself mostly, and you always get to the middle part of a book and think this is the biggest load of rubbish I've ever written in my life, and then go through that. I mean, for all of the people out there who are aspiring authors, the self-doubt and the fraud syndrome never gets, the imposter syndrome never gets any better. It's always like, oh, this is a piece of rubbish. And then, once I finish something, I step back from it for a little bit and then I come back to it. And, then I might think, oh, this is actually pretty good. But it's been interesting because I've been recording audiobooks retrospectively for Alice Miranda and reading books that I have not read for years. And something that was really lovely, last year I did a couple of Alice Miranda books, and my audio engineer, Jason, said to me, he said, this is a really good book. And I was like, yeah, it is, isn't it? And it was kind of nice to know that I still thought it was okay.
Yes, yes. Okay, so we're going to have just time for two more questions because we are coming towards the end of our hour, and this has been an absolute delightful hour. Um, I'm just trying to get the person's name. It's about what online tools you use or what digital tools you use, like a specific writing program.
Yeah, I can see one from Leanne saying, do I use
Yes,
specific writing program?
yeah.
No, I don't use Scrivener or anything, nothing like that. I just use Word. I'm just a Word girl. But
And so
I
you
do
plotting and
make,
everything just through Word?
yeah, so I just Word, and I often, though, like I have the comments on in the sidebar, and I'll often make comments to myself throughout the story. So I'll say, check this, this doesn't sound right, this sort of thing. So I'm always making comments, and when I send them to my publisher, I leave the comments in there so that my editor and my publisher can kind of react to those as well.
To see where your head was.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. One last question. If there is one thing you wish you knew when you started, when you won that first literary prize 20 something
Mm-hmm.
ago that you didn't, what would it be?
That it's going to take a lot of hard work to get to the place that I'm in now, and that it is a marathon, not a sprint. That's what I wish. I wish I knew that, probably even too in terms of like, how little authors get paid, that, you're going to have to really do well at this and work hard at this to be able to make this your career. And so I think you have a lot of expectations that are unrealistic perhaps at the start. So it would have been handy to have someone give me a few more realistic expectations.
Indeed. I think that's true in many parts of life about
Yeah.
where you go. Look, thank you very much. There was a couple of very specific questions about the festival and about the pitching sessions. If those people could actually write to us at info@writingnsw.org.au, I think we'll be able to give you a better answer than what we could today. But that is all the time we have. Thank you for everyone being with us today. It was great to see so many people online, and the questions, as always, were thoughtful and incisive. Massive thanks to you, Jacqueline, for being our guest and for sharing your expertise on the world of writing for kids and young people. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on
Thank
for
you.
Friday.
Thank you for having me. Thank
All
you
right.
very much. And all the best, everybody. I hope you all achieve your dreams.
Indeed, indeed. And look, if you'd like to learn more from Jacqueline, as well as a host of other great writers and publishers in the kids and YA sector, then why not come and join us for the Kids and YA Festival 2025 that Jacqueline has directed? And details, of course, are on our website at writingnsw.org.au. Again, if you're not already subscribed to Newsbite, our weekly news email newsletter that lets you know when events such as this are taking place, as well as the services we offer and the opportunities for writers across the state, please make sure you detail that you do so. Again, details at our website. Thank you again, Jacqueline, and I wish everyone in the audience a good long weekend. Farewell.
Yes, have a great weekend.
Bye bye.